The Double is one of my most anticipated movies of 2014. The reasons for that, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that I absolutely adore Richard Ayoade. Now, he's the writer-director of this, and his first film, Submarine, came out a couple of years ago, and I absolutely adored that film. Plus, Richard Ayoade, for those of you who may not know, is primarily known as a comedy actor. He is, well, he's usually on like panel shows and stuff like that on British TV, and was also one of the lead characters in the IT Crowd, which I think made it across to the States, and I'm pretty sure they remade it at one point. But anyway, so he's primarily known as a comedy actor and turned his hand to feature directing. So that was one of the reasons I was looking forward to The Double. The other being that anybody who knows my channel or my sort of favourite movies will know that Terry Gilliam's Brazil is one of my all-time favourite films. It's quite possibly in like the top 5, although, you know, the actual ranking tends to change and fluctuate. And looking at the trailer for this, I thought it looks very sort of Terry Gilliam Brazil, you know, in terms of style and tone, so that got me doubly excited for it. So the film itself follows a very timid sort of clerk in a quasi-government agency, although it's never really overly apparent what they do there. That clerk is called Simon James, and he's played by Jesse Eisenberg. He falls for one of his co-workers, a girl called Hannah, played by, well, they're both on the cover here, Mia Wasikowska. I can never pronounce her name, but she's a terrific actress, and she's one of my favourite actresses sort of working at the moment. There they both are on the cover. So he falls for Hannah, but he's really too timid to sort of make a move, and then his exact double, or doppelganger if you will, a guy called James Simon, also played by Jesse Eisenberg, starts working there, and he's like Simon's complete opposite. You know, he's overly confident, he's very sort of almost abrasive, and basically starts to take over his life in a way. So that's the basic plot of the film, and can't really go any more into that without spoiling it, although, you know, if you're anything sort of, you know, like me, and you've seen a lot of these types of movies before, you'll probably know where it's going. You'll be able to figure it out, but that's the basic plot. Now, there are a few things that I really liked about this film. Now, I do like Jesse Eisenberg, by and large, although I always thought that he's limited. He's like a thinking man's Michael Cera. And I always thought his range was quite limited to being the sort of quietly cocky dickhead, basically. You know, the character that we see in The Social Network, his sort of caricature of Mark Zuckerberg. I always thought, well, that's the sort of thing Jesse Eisenberg's known for, and I can't really imagine him doing anything else. But, you know, fair play to Jesse Eisenberg. He's really good in this, especially as Simon, the more timid of the two. You know, he manages to make Simon very likeable, and he does play it very timid and shy, and there are quite a lot of subtle nuances to his performance. You actually really start to feel for this guy, and you start to really like him over the course of the film. So Jesse Eisenberg, I must say, sort of defied my expectations in a way, because he was the one wild card going into this, because I'm always a little bit sort of unsure about Jesse Eisenberg, the same way I am about him playing Lex Luthor in Batman vs Superman. You know, I'm a little bit, I'm not so sure, but in fair play to him, he was good in this. Mia Wasikowska, oh god, I'm butchering that name, I just know I am. As I mentioned, she's one of my favourite actresses working today, and she continues that streak in this movie because she is so, always so sort of lovable, but has a very distinct presence, because more often than not, you know, she's quite a strong character but always feels quite vulnerable. She always manages to layer all of her performances in that way, and I just think she's very, very watchable and just very sort of lovable and charismatic, and you know, I would watch her in anything. I think she's terrific in this. Jesse Eisenberg as James Simon, who is Simon James's double. God, that gets confusing to say. I'm going to talk about that as if it's a second separate performance, because that's the side of it I think comes most naturally to Jesse Eisenberg, and I think you can sort of tell when you're watching the movie that the sort of cocksure, arrogant, you know, prick comes a bit more naturally to Jesse Eisenberg, but, you know, he was good in both roles. The film itself is beautifully shot. It looks absolutely gorgeous, and the parallels in terms of style and tone with Terry Gilliam's Brazil are perhaps a little bit too overt at times. I think there were probably subtler ways in sort of aping Terry Gilliam's style, and at some points you watch this and you go, these scenes look like they've been lifted out of Brazil and planted into this movie. So I feel like, and ironically enough, because this is what sort of the film's about, I feel like the film has a bit of an identity crisis. It does. I would like to have seen stylistically it do something a little bit more of its own, but that's not so much criticism, because, you know, if you're not overly familiar with Terry Gilliam's work or you haven't seen Brazil, you'll probably think, you know, this is amazingly beautiful, which is. But I watched it and I was like, I've sort of seen this before, and I would like it to have done more of its own thing. But I know that sounds like a criticism, but I did really enjoy this movie, but that was just one thought I had while I was watching it. The plot itself is quite, up until the sort of end, the climax, is fairly straightforward and easy to follow, but in the climax it's not overly apparent. It's somewhat ambiguous as to exactly what was going on and how the mechanics of the story work. I've only watched it the once, so this may sort of become clearer on repeat viewings, but I definitely feel like it's a film that you need to watch more than once to sort of pick up, you know, exactly what's going on, especially in the character interactions. So it is a somewhat ambiguous ending. That's not so much a criticism, because I do enjoy a good ambiguous ending, but so long as it adds up, you know, when you watch it a second or third time, you know, it has to add up to that ending. It has to earn that ending. So that's something that I need to sort of revisit when I watch it again, and I will watch it again because I did really enjoy it. I like the sort of themes of identity and bureaucracy, and this is something, you know, this is one of the reasons Brazil spoke to me as much as it did, and why it's in my favourite films. Now this, you know, this film, The Double, while it is good, and I mean you can see here it's got loads of really good ratings that they've put on the cover there, it is a really good movie, but it's not Brazil good. Again, that might be because I'm such a big fan of Brazil, but anyway, it is good. It stumbles sort of now and again, and it does start to maybe trip over its own narrative, but it sort of more than makes up for it with the characters and performances. Another standout thing is, I mentioned it's beautifully shot. There are certain shots in this that are very sort of quasi horror movie-esque in as much as they're quite haunting. There's a few images and shots and scenes in this that are very, I'd describe them as haunting, and those are the bits that really stand out and stick with you after the movie's finished. And to be honest, having seen this, I'd be interested to see what Richard Ayoade would do with a horror movie, or like, you know, something a bit more overtly dark, because he definitely has an eye for haunting imagery. So that was something I really enjoyed. I mean, all in all, I would say that if you enjoyed Submarine and you're interested to see what Richard Ayoade does next, definitely check this film out. If you're a fan of this sort of movie, the sort of quirky dramas, like, you know, most of Terry Gilliam's back catalogue, check this out. Definitely, there'll be something there for you. As I said, I really enjoyed this film. You know, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is really good. I'm definitely interested to see what Richard Ayoade does next. I think he's obviously a very talented filmmaker, and it's weird because not really many people, I mean, I don't see in the sort of movie communities on YouTube or even in magazines other than the sort of reviews, nobody really talks about Richard Ayoade, but he's definitely one to keep an eye on. You know, he's definitely a somewhat unique filmmaker at the moment. I mean, whereas this sort of apes all the Terry Gilliam stuff, Submarine very much homage the French New Wave cinema, like Jean-Luc Godard and other sort of French auteurs like that. So Richard Ayoade's taking, you know, styles that he obviously likes in cinema and is applying them to his own films, a little bit too overtly at times, but he's definitely a director to keep an eye on. So The Double is a rewarding watch. It's definitely one that will no doubt need repeat viewings, but I would recommend it. It's a very interesting movie.